Hey everyone, Dan here. Before we get into it, if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe button and keep in mind that these are my own thoughts, opinions, and ideas. These are not meant to be, nor should you take them as investment or trading advice in any way, shape, or form. Do your own due diligence, put in the work for yourself, and make your decisions based on that. Enjoy. All right, folks, here we are on Saturday, October 14th. We're going to take a look at 6 stocks today. TTOO CGC GOEV NLST ACB and MULN. Now, a bunch of these are going to be recaps because we have levels on the chart. Some we don't, and some we have additional levels to put in. T2, because it went through its reverse split, we have all of the levels to put back in. So that's going to take a little bit, but let's get started so that we can start to work ourselves through there. So a couple of things that I want to note. First of all, there are now several gaps, and I'm not going to scroll back and see if we're catching other ones, but I'm going to focus on this one here and this one here, just because they're the most recent and they're close into the price action. So we'll focus on those for now. I'm going to gray these out just so that they're not sort of dominating the chart, but if we come near those levels, we'll notice, hey, there's some slightly off color horizontal line here. Oh, right, there's a gap. So who knows? I mean, obviously right now it's under immense bearish pressure. So, is it going to be able to muster the strength to come back to those levels, especially being that those levels now after the reverse split are high, right? Just sort of dollars wise, you think of a lot of the people who were investing in T2 pre-splits, and those are oftentimes folks who like to invest in stocks that are much, much lower priced because they can get a lot of them, or whatever it is. But I think sometimes that's sort of like an unforeseen factor in reverse splits, in sort of like who is buying the stock. There are just folks who like buying lower priced stocks for, again, whatever reason. But there's downtrend resistance here as well, and I'll try to put it pretty far away in case that sort of dominates the action for a while. Now, I'll put a couple of levels here into the slightly into the double digits, but I'm going to try to mainly focus down here. We have this low of 540, so I'm going to put that in, and then I'm going to work my way up and go ahead and see what levels we might have now that the reverse split is done. So what I'm looking for here, if you haven't seen before, common areas in previous price action where it has flipped from support to resistance, or areas where it's sort of like wrestled with a certain price range. And I put them in as a line. I used to put them in more frequently as boxes, like rectangles, but it can make it so cluttered, and I get less levels in that way. And sometimes when you have stocks like this that move really, really huge, when they move like huge percentage gains and losses, you can really sort of hurt yourself by not putting in additional levels, because it just clutters the chart too much, because sometimes it just moves through a ton of levels in a day. Okay, these are the ones that are apparent to me. Let me just get rid of this. All right, so the purpose here is I plot them on the daily, because those are, in my opinion, the stronger levels. And then I zoom in and use it for getting a sense of what the stock looks like on different time frames. I'm not going to put that there. Sorry, I was just seeing if there was another level there. Now I'm going to zoom into the 10-minute and just sort of see. So based on this wild action recently, we're just seeing the shrug off here from that downtrend resistance, trying to catch support over that 17 level that we have. Hey folks, just so you know, you can get these videos early and ad-free. If you click on the description below and become a member, you can make that happen, and I really appreciate the support. Thanks a lot. Enjoy the rest of the video. And there are a couple of things happening here. There's like gap and there's level, and then couldn't hold support there, but it tried an entire day, and then was using this gap as resistance at that point, and slipped down here several levels to this 885-ish level. Tried to hold that in pre-markets and then sort of gave way to that yesterday. So, you know, not a ton extra that I'd put in here at the moment. You know, as things play out in the coming week, we'll get a lot more price action. We'll have a lot more sort of clarity on where the price is moving through and what ranges we might want to focus on. Now, flipping over here to the Think or Swim study, we see, you know, obviously it was out of the channel here, pulled back to the mid-range, sort of wrestled with that for a while, another push to the upper bound, and then a smooth move right through to the bottom range of the channel, and then was wrestling again with the mid-range before the split, and then that obviously has, like we said, put intense bearish pressure under the stock. So right now headed toward the lower bound of the channel. You see that lower bound of the channel, you know, gave way, and then this candle got put in outside the bounds of the channel. So it's hard to see when it's when you're zoomed out a little bit there, but see bearish pressure picking back up now as it was sort of dying down, but it was mostly like under stress because, you know, you had this nice smooth action on the histogram and then this just herky-jerky action, but always with sort of the bearish pressure never dying back down to the baseline on the histogram. So that's, you know, something to be aware of and take note of, like, hey, when this bearish momentum dies down, it dies down like this. It doesn't even get back to the baseline on the histogram. So that can be sort of like a heads up. Something is happening here. All right, so that's T2. Let's flip over to CGC. So CGC, we can start here on the 10-minute and then we'll flip over to the daily. So levels holding up really nicely. You see it moving, just sort of batting around right now after these wild moves. You can also see it's sort of really in the thick of it, right? There's a ton of levels here. And so it might get sort of very sticky in this range, absent of some major catalyst that could toss it strongly in one direction or the other. And then the catalysts are always interesting because you get to see how the levels hold up against a news catalyst that is, you know, putting the stock through double-digit percentage gains or losses, or sometimes even triple-digit gains, that sort of thing. But yeah, this is just to point out this is in a thick area. I know it's hard to see, but that's why, you know, like I said, we zoom in. Even if we zoom into the hour, you're only left with a few levels to need to focus on. So on the daily, it looks like a mess, but it's a mess for a reason because zooming in, the levels kind of start to make sense. You know, there might be a bit of a downtrend resistance developing here to here to here. I'm going to hold off on it for now, again, just to not further clutter the chart. And also, if it is just in this sticky range, I'll let it sort of work through its stickiness. And then maybe there's some levels that we can get rid of and clean up the chart a little bit. And then if we wanted to put in the downtrend resistance at that point, it might make more sense. If we pop the levels off, I'm just sort of curious to see where the volume is positioning. I don't know why Webull keeps resetting my default indicators that I have. So yeah, here you further see that, again, this is still on the daily. You see how sticky this range is that it's in. So I know that it doesn't perfectly line up, but it's it shows you pretty clearly, right, that same sticky range that we have, because we have a lot more levels than comes up on the volume analysis. But this sticky range is also pretty in line with the sticky range in the volume, right? Where it's all happening right around here. So there might just be a ton of volume happening that just sort of sucks the stock kind of sideways for some period of time until it decides, do I want to settle lower than this? Do I want to settle higher than this? Or, like I said, is there just some catalyst that comes in out of the blue and throws it all, you know, into a different range because of that reason? So, so that's sort of what I'm looking at the moment. Now on the Think or Swim study, I'll pop CGC in here, and we see here the 180 to 200 EMA cloud coming in. That provided clear resistance when it was making that big move up out of the channel, pushed it back down toward the mid-range of the channel, and now it's just sort of like slowly dripping, slowly dripping down a little bit. Hold on, this is gonna screw with me if I don't just change it all up here. Okay, slowly dripping down a bit. So no major moves to the lower bound of the channel here, right? So sort of questioning how strong this bearish momentum is. Again, I know I keep saying catalyst, but absent some catalyst, it just does look like it's a relatively sticky zone. It might continue to sort of trickle down, but it's trickling down into this very, very sticky zone. So it might have a bunch of levels that it's kind of, coming up as potential support as it's, trickling. Doesn't mean that those can't give way, and it does, put in lower price action. That could certainly happen, but this is just to say it swung way up out of the channel, hit this 180 to 200 EMA cloud resistance, came down to the mid-range of the channel, and then it did not push down to the lower bound of the channel. So it wasn't one of these like crazy erratic moves that I call a sad face pattern, which is when something has a huge spike up and then just very quickly retraces all of the movement. Now it is a good percentage of the movement that it's come down to retrace, but I would just note that it hasn't pressed toward this lower bound of the channel yet. It's sitting right here on this mid to low range, this gray line right here. Bearish momentum on the histogram dying down a little bit. That histogram can sometimes, throw some hiccups, right? Like here, you have a hiccup candle. And also sometimes it can die down and then it just picks up again. So I'm not always super convinced of the die down absent some other indication that something may be happening on the chart. And I don't quite see that yet. I don't see it really making a strong motion to retake the mid-range of the channel. If it did, then I'd be more interested in that histogram. And I don't see it maybe coming through and trying to break this yet to be put in downtrend resistance that we see here. I don't see it coming, for example, to just swing higher than these recent highs. If it were doing that and this were dying down and we're retaking mid-range to that channel, then I would sort of put some more weight into those things and be maybe a bit more interested. All right. GOEV. So GOEV, it's sort of in no man's land at the moment. Don't have a ton that we can put in. We can put in a few additional levels here. Put one there. Something right around-ish there. Put its right, let's call it right here. But yeah, not a ton of additional levels to put in. We'll erase these and take a look at the EMAs in a second. One thing that I would note is, if we extend this absolutely happens sometimes. And we would have spoken about this when we put this downtrend resistance in. When we get a break of downtrend resistance, I'm always pretty skeptical, because unless we get a clear distance from the downtrend resistance, all too often what ends up happening is the stock just makes a little bit of a move and then comes back down and starts treating that as downtrend support, which is a sad term. And that's basically the situation GOEV is getting itself into right now. You see it's coming down here, and it's almost looking as though it's just going to start to walk the price action down and treat that as downtrend support. So that's why I extended it. We'll see if it starts to do that. We'll see if even, in a more bearish scenario, it gets drawn back under that downtrend resistance. That could certainly happen as well. So we're just going to have to wait and see, but there's not a really price action to go off of. You see down here, if we zoom out to the monthly, this is like we're in the lowest of the low. So back here on the daily, if I get rid of these, so we don't have to see them, and I pull in our EMAs, we can at least see sort of how far away we are from the 8, 21, and the 34. And sometimes if there's really strong catalysts pulling a stock down, it can get an incredible distance from the EMA, like the 8 EMA, and not really have a path back in the short term because the catalyst is so strong and so heavy. But, absent of that, the further it gets away from the 8 EMA, the more I would be apt to say it's going to do something to at least try to test that 8 EMA. And it did it just a couple of days ago. So I know it's drawn down quite a bit since then. It was down 8.5% that day, and then, mostly flat on Friday. But, it is a decent distance away from the EMA. So I would start to look for it, again, absent some additional catalyst that drives it further down, to maybe make an attempt at that 8, or even if it gets over that 8, that 21 like we saw here, the 34 like we saw here, those would be the things to maybe kind of look at and see how those play out. But the distance is something to note, depending on, like I say, the sort of news and other catalyst factors. So GOEV. So in the channel here, you're going to see probably something similar. Yeah, so you see it slipping out the lower bound of the channel here. And whenever something leaves the bounds of the channel, we look for it to come back and retest the mid-range. So here it left the upper bound of the channel. And sometimes, depending on the catalyst, depending on how strong the momentum is, it can spend a lot of time out of the channel. So just because this only spent a few days out, don't, let that fool you and think, okay, if this slips the lower bound of the channel for 2 days now, then it probably could only do that for another couple of days. That's certainly not the case. It can spend a long time out of the channel, but what we look for is eventually for it to come back and test the mid-range like we saw here. The question is always, what does it do when it tests the mid-range, right? Does it get support? Does it come down and have to test the other bound of the channel? And then does that hold? And if so, then what happens? This constant sort of flux between the mid-range and what's happening there versus the bounds of the channel. And so we're in a, getting into a uniquer position at the moment. Like we said, it's just a couple of days out of the channel, and really on Friday it came up and tried to test the lower bound of the channel, couldn't quite make it there. So you see bearish momentum on the histogram picking up. That was, seems in line with the price action. So, to my mind, absent some really clear move into the channel, which may then result at an attempt at the mid-range, but may also just mean that it gets trapped under this red wave cloud and gets pushed down further. I'm just sort of watching this one for the time being and seeing what happens, especially here with no clear support levels to be putting in, other than potentially this downtrend support, which is, not a support that you would probably be playing off of anyway. All right, NLST we haven't looked at in a while. NLST has also an interesting sort of trend line situation happening here. So this was previous downtrend resistance that was broken, and then it got drawn down into this day here, down almost 20% on this candle, and then catching support here and then losing and recently regaining support over this 198.7 level. I'm going to flip that from dotted to solid. Dotted is what I put a level when I'm unsure how strong it is. Maybe that's because there's very thin price action, or maybe I didn't take it off of the daily time frame. But then once it sort of confirms that, then I feel more comfortable putting it in. So I'm going to put that in there. I'll also put a level in, where do we want this? Yeah, I think, tricky. But it's maybe here. It might also be one sort of close down. We can put one here, actually. I feel good about that. And then what about this guy? Okay, so I'll put those levels there for now, in case it does dip down further. But this is basically a second attempted break of this downtrend resistance. So we have this downtrend resistance all the way from April of 2023, confirmed here, tried to break here. That was the one that we were talking about, and then got drawn back down under. So this is the second attempted break. That break was pretty weak. That did the thing that we always worry about when something breaks downtrend resistance, that it just quickly gets drawn right back under. It's exactly what happens. Now, that's obviously not going to happen with this attempted break because it's already put in several more candles. But I would just be cautious of this drawdown here, because you don't want to get yourself into a situation where it comes down and just starts walking outside that downtrend resistance and treating it as downtrend support. And you essentially end up in the same situation. You're just losing price just consistently. So I would really, if this is going to dip any further, I would really want to see it hold at 198.7 level, and if nothing else, at least walk it sideways and get further distance from this downtrend resistance, because right now it is still too close for comfort for me to feel confident that it's not potentially going to come back down toward this and do that motion. Now, obviously, if it gets a swing up and it swings higher than this swing, then I would feel pretty confident. Even if it did that relatively soon, that would give me much more confidence in the price action. Now coming over here, NLST, to our think or swim study. Here, still on the daily, you see it was wrestling there for a long time with the mid-range of the channel. Now, interestingly, the TTM squeeze indicator is starting to trigger, put in 4 trigger candles. And so then the question always becomes, what's the move, right? You see, it put in triggers down here, and it's a good place to be putting in triggers when you're at or very close to the mid-range of the channel, that bright blue line. And that's exactly what we see here. It didn't start to trigger until there got a little bit of bumpy motion, right? These are all fighting, the candle bodies are moving through the mid-range of the channel. Here we're a little bit above, and that's when it started to trigger. And then it's still triggering, and we're dipping right below. So we're not putting candle bodies in through the center of that channel anymore. We're sort of slightly higher, slightly lower as it's triggering. So yeah, the question then becomes, where's the move going, right? If it fires, and even if the indicator did a good job and it triggered and then fired, and when it fired, a big move happened within at least a few candles, which direction does it go? It doesn't tell you that bit of magic. So that's something that you have to try to, catch when it happens. We see here triggering right near the mid-range of the channel, and then when it fired, it made sort of this counter move, which we see sometimes, which just means that it came up, and then the real move was this one down here, right? And that took a second trigger and fire to happen, and that's when you had some big down days, sort of perpetually through much of that firing state. So that's the other question, is, will we get a fire that doesn't really result in much of anything, and then it will need to re-trigger and refire for us to get the full move? Sometimes that's what happens as well. So indicators are what they are. There are no crystal balls, sorry to tell you. If you're looking for a magic formula, I don't know, you're on the wrong channel. So ACB, putting in, this is a bit of a sad face pattern here, a huge move up, and then retracing just sort of all the way at the moment, came down and filled this gap. So, to the extent to which this was coming down to try to fill this gap, maybe that can provide something. Although, if you look at where that gap fill would have sort of completed, it was treating that as resistance, as support for a while, and then flipped it to resistance in the last few days. So, we'll see if that becomes sort of troublesome or not. Now, here, I'm going to put in a purple level. What that means is this is a resistance level that I'd put in on the chart anyway, but also it is the beginning of a gap. So if it comes back up to fill this gap, now that it just filled the down gap, can it come up and get through that 60, say 62, and push up toward that 66, 67 range? That one is actually, that gap fill is a bit lower, right? That's down here at 65.05. So I'm not going to put it in because it's close to this guy anyway, but we'll just note it. And let me put in some additional levels here while we're here, which could help with some sort of lower time frame and views of what's happening. Whoa. Getting wild with my trigger finger here. Okay. Put some levels there. And we do have, previous price action in this range, so we do have stuff to go off of. That's a good one there. Yeah, that really lines up well. And then just in case, we'll put something smidge lower here. It gets very cluttered very quickly. There's maybe a thinner price level a bit higher than this, but 47.54 I think is sort of the stronger level. So if we had zoomed in, we had these levels on, this is where you see it sort of moving through. Though ACB is one of those charts that gets really ugly when you zoom into a lower time frame, just gets very barcodey. So with some additional volume, maybe that would sort itself out a little bit and look a little bit smoother. But yeah, to the extent to which it wants to come fill this gap, that's there now. So we'll put in that exact fill level if it gets into that space. Or who knows, if it blows right through it, then maybe we don't ever need to really come and put it in. ACB on the Think or Swim study. So zoomed out of the channel, obviously. So then not only was it out of the channel, but it was wrestling with this 180 to 200 EMA cloud. That was a lot to contend with. drew itself back into the channel, slipped the mid-range, which is this bright blue line, and then hasn't come down to like fully stretched toward the lower bound of the channel, which is interesting. So maybe there's not a ton of additional bearish momentum there. We'll see. I mean, it's gone through a lot, right? This is, like we said, it's basically fully retraced the move. So, you know, what more do you want than that? But you do certainly worry that the momentum created from such a drawdown in a relatively short period of time, you know, what that momentum continues to bring. You see volume continuing to kind of die down here, so maybe some opportunity, but it is interesting to me that it hasn't needed to, try to fix this a little bit, hasn't needed to stretch down and at least test the bottom bound of this channel. So maybe that's something there. We'll see. I don't know. The histogram is pretty herky-jerky at the moment, so not giving us any real clear information, but it's mostly just sideways, slightly trickling down for these, you know, slew of candles. So we'll see where that brings us, but it's not sort of indicating strongly to me at the moment that it wants to like do a big push lower or a big push higher, which may just mean that it continues to move relatively sideways and slightly up or down until that bigger move comes. Nothing triggering here in the TTM squeeze indicator either. MULN, so for all the other drama that's going on, this is just going to be about the chart, so just be aware of that. We had this downtrend resistance that was broken, tried to settle here over this 43.57 level, and now has had to come down. 39.01 was the level that we had in. You know, if I know that there's tons of other factors at play with this one, but if I were just looking at this purely as a chart, this would be the place to either sort of like get a little bit of hope or get very concerned, because you see the wick of this candle, you see the wick of this candle. That's why this level's on the chart. And so if this loses this, and especially if it flips it to resistance, then I'd get really concerned. Where's the floor? Who knows? But if it can sort of, you know, go to this range again and the bulls show up again and the buying pressure is there, then, you know, maybe there's opportunity for something. Now, this was a pretty decent swing high off of the last one, even though it wasn't as large of a swing high as here. But what I'd want to see if it did push off of this level would be to swing higher than these levels here. But I don't know if it may have a hard time not slipping this and flipping it to resistance, but we'll just have to see. This one is so wild that it's really hard to predict, even if you're sort of like, well, logically, based on the catalyst and the information, this is what should happen. Sometimes that's, I feel like that often eventually happens, but sometimes the interim period is quite bizarre. So on the Thinkorswim study here, you see, I mean, it's so flat recently, though it's, you know, continuing to sort of trickle down, and super long firing period here, nothing really happening there, just kind of hugging the mid-range of the channel, now hugging the lower to mid-range of the channel, but not stretching the upper bound of the channel, obviously, but not even stretching down to test the lower bound of the channel, really. This is the mid to lower bound of the channel there. We can see this a little bit better. Yeah, this is the mid, because here's the mid-range. The lower bound of the channel is further lower. It's bright white like this. So, you know, again, sort of like some of the other stocks we've been looking at, they're doing this slow sort of trickle down, but they're not putting in that big motion to just come down and test the lower bound of the channel, or you know, make a strong move up toward the upper bound of the channel. So absent of that, could it just sort of like trickle into oblivion? I suppose so. But yeah, you see it just disappears off the chart here, unfortunately. But that lower bound of the channel is somewhere further down there. So so we'll just have to imagine where it is at the moment. But yeah, absent of that, you know, some sort of indication that like here's the next big move. You know, it is just sort of like sideways / slightly down. But to me, even more so than the Thinkorswim study, the Webull chart is of interest to me on this one, because, like I say, this is the level. Boom, boom, and then the big question mark. What's going to happen here? So We'll see, but that's where I'm going to leave it for now. All right, folks, I hope that you enjoy your weekend, and as always, I appreciate you watching, and I will see you in the next video.